On this episode of the show, I have with me Robert Brennan. He is co-founder and CEO at OpenHands. And we're going to be talking about, well, the impact of tools that are helping us change the way we develop software, or maybe it's always been that way. We just haven't noticed it. But we're going to dive into what Robert means about outsource the typing to the LLM and the evolution of software engineering itself, and some of the maintenance components of this, the future of the SDLC, and what really should software engineers or engineers in general be holding on to when it comes to skill sets. Robert, thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. All right, before we dive in, tell us all what OpenHands does.
Yeah, so OpenHands is a software development agent. The idea is that it is able to not only write code, but it can run the code that it writes. It can Google an error message that comes out. It can add debug statements, basically do that whole inner loop of development as it iterates its way towards finishing a task. I would say we were one of the first agents on the market, really quick on the heels of Devon's launch. We actually started as a project called OpenDevon, but changed the name to OpenHands. And really, I would say where we've differentiated from some of the other agents that have come out, like Claude Code, is that we're really heavily focused on running agents sandboxed in the cloud, right? Giving them their own workstation that's separated from your laptop, so they can run a little bit more safely without you having to worry about them deleting all your files, and more scalably, right? You can run ones to thousands of these agents in the cloud without them competing for resources, stepping on each other's toes, et cetera. So really focus on that much more scalable cloud-based agent way of working.
Absolutely. So obviously, you're deep into the shift that's happening, and it's interesting because I kind of am thinking about this as where people are along their maturity curve of now actual software development. I don't know if we really had that thing, or maybe I'm just kind of creating a term for it, but there is now a maturity of where people are, how much they're using this, how comfortable they are. We are hearing a lot of greenfield projects and some other type of projects being leveraging these tools. When you're looking at just the marketplace, maybe we'll just kind of take a wider view of this real quick, but when you're looking at the marketplace and you're looking at adoption, is it pretty much table stakes to have some kind of exposure to the engineering team to at least one tool at this point?
Yeah, I would say pretty much every engineer at this point has at least gotten started with, an AI-powered IDE or, using GitHub Copilot for autocomplete. I think if you're not using AI at all as a software engineer, that's pretty rare to find these days, and you're probably moving more slowly than your peers. I would say your median developer now is starting to experiment with Claude Code. I think this is still it feels a little bit foreign still to be using an agent and outsourcing a good chunk of your work to an AI agent that's going to do the nitty gritty work of opening up a bunch of files and making a bunch of tweaks. But I think the median developer has started to make that transition, at least for certain tasks, right? Fixing merge conflicts, or improving test coverage, or getting CI/CD to pass. Those little toily tasks that don't really involve a lot of creativity or critical thinking are really easy to just shove off to an agent, let the agent figure it out and handle it. So I think most teams have at least adopted it at that kind of individual pair programmer running on your laptop type level. But really, what's exciting to me is what we're seeing the early adopters do. Because they're really operating at another level of scale and getting a much bigger productivity boost. I would say your median developer is probably getting something like a 20, 30, 40% boost in productivity for the coding part of their job by running an agent locally on their laptop. And that works great for your ad hoc feature development, bug fixing type work where there is still a lot of critical thinking that has to go into that work. There is still some creativity involved in the process that the human has to bring to bear on the situation. But for those early adopters are quickly finding huge chunks of work as part of software development, often related to tech debt, maintenance, modernization, things like that. Which are just highly repeatable, highly automatable tasks that don't really involve any critical thinking or creativity, and you don't really need as much of a human in the loop for those types of tasks. So like managing dependencies, for instance, like pretty rote process that developers have to do all the time, but is just kind of like, frustrating and not super differentiated. Doesn't really take a lot of brain power. And they're finding ways to automate things like that at scale and get, literally like a 10x productivity boost for that tiny slice of work. So these what we're calling agent engineers, these very early adopters of AI, are figuring out how to be literally 10x more productive for certain parts of the engineering process.
Absolutely. I actually want to talk a little bit more detail, but before I do, because I'll forget to ask you about this. When we talk about these agent engineers becoming 10x more productive, what happens with that time? I guess are they what do they do? So if they're 10x more productive, they're going to have more something, right? What are they doing with what is that something?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. What I would say, I've been a software developer for almost 20 years now. And there's a part of my job that I absolutely love, right? The creative aspect of it, the like really hard problem solving of like, how am I going to architect this thing? Our database is structured this way. We need it to be structured this way going forward. The migration is going to be hard. Like thinking through those like really, really tough problems, and thinking through like, okay, what does the customer want here? How can we deliver that? How can we deliver maybe 80% of that value with 20% of the effort? Like there's a lot of really creative problems involved in software engineering, but there's also a lot of toil. Right, a lot of my time gets spent just like, I already know what to build. I already know, what lines of code need to get written. And now I just have to open up a bunch of files, hammer out a bunch of lines of code. I've got my changes proposed in GitHub, but the tests are failing for some stupid reason, some like API changes. So there's just like a lot of like rote work that goes into the job as well. And I think ideally what we'll see is that AI is able to take on all that toil as part of the job, all the stuff that we don't want to do, and create space for us to really focus on what humans are best at, which is that creativity, that critical thinking, that lateral thinking, right? That really like is the fun part of software engineering. And I think it just so happens that large language models are really good at the toil. They're really good at the rote stuff that like you just kind of have to put your head down and charge at. And they're not so good at the creativity. They're not so good. They can help. They can help dialogue around and brainstorm and things like that. But you really need a human thinking about, what are we going to build? How are we going to build it? What does the user want?
Fantastic. I guess as we're talking about, these are tasks that typically are going to probably take, there's less priority. They're going to take it back. Engineers probably don't want to do them if they had a choice. I mean, they get them done. It's part of their job. If we're removing that and we're talking about engineers are good at problem solving. So if they're not typing as much, which is time consuming, figuring out the piece of code that you got to write, make sure it works and all that stuff. There's overhead. You got to context switch all those things. If they're not writing as much code in their problem solving, are they still sitting within the engineering team as often? Are they moving into sitting with other people in the business? So it could be the product team. If you're in an IT organization, maybe you're moving into the business side. I mean, are they shifting into other parts of the org to apply the problem solving, or is it still problem solving but still engineering fundamental problems?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I do think teams are going to be reorganized. I do think the proportions of like number of software engineers per product manager, or UX designers per engineer, or QA folks. I think those proportions are going to change over time as this new technology matures and we figure out how to best leverage it. I think still unclear to me like exactly how that's going to play out. It's a very different world. I do think that there is still a very strong need for engineering as a discipline, though. What you find is that for a really well-defined task, an agent is able to take that task and execute on it. And increasingly, they're able to take on bigger and bigger tasks, but they do need to be very well defined, right? And it takes a human being to really think through, what is it we actually want to build here, and like how am I going to define this task in such a way that the AI can execute on it, and I can be confident in the output, right? And I think that is still a very big engineering problem. It just involves, the work itself looks a bit different. Instead of like, hammering on my keyboard inside of an IDE, it's more me sitting back in my chair and thinking, and like, maybe taking some time to write a design doc or something like that. So the work looks a little bit different in terms of like the external visibility, but the internal process of what's going on in the engineer's head is still very much the same.
Absolutely. It's interesting. I don't know who I was talking to a couple of weeks ago. We talked about architects, and we're talking about how if we went back in time, architects did everything by hand. I mean, they spent hours and hours with their team on paper. Every change required more and more time, and then as CAD came into play and it's gotten more advanced, the tools have gotten more advanced. They're not sitting there sketching with pencil and whatever tools they use. I have no idea. And we were kind of talking about that in engineering, and historically engineers, if we were to go way, way back, there was just less resources. They had to know more. I remember going for an interview and people were critical because I did not have memorized the appropriate number of Java libraries. They're like, we're not going to be able to let you use another resource. You need to have more in that brain. I was like, it doesn't seem necessary when I can flip through a book at that point, go to a Google or whatever. And I think we're seeing that happen more and more. I mean, obviously we've seen the stat of Stack Overflow and the drop in access to Stack Overflow. But I guess when we look at how things evolve for technical people, is it surprising that the coding part or some of the things that you mentioned that are going away are just the next step of making an engineer less overhead, just more efficient? I mean, is it surprising, or is it just a natural progression?
Yeah, no, I think it is very much a natural progression, right? I think we're figuring out how to, automate the parts of our jobs that are not really differentiated, right? Just like the way Google automated, some people are really good at memorizing, the entire, all the libraries in Java, and they were maybe sought after for that reason. And then Google came out and shifted the skill set that you need to be a software engineer. I made it more accessible to a wider range of people. Maybe people who don't have that like really deep memorization skill, but have really great critical thinking skills. Suddenly, they become much more powerful developers because Google's there for them to help them, find those references. I think similarly with the development of large language models, you're already seeing a lot of folks who have, really sharp creativity skills. They're really able to come up with cool ideas for like what to build, what to deliver to users. And then vibe coding platforms like Lovable are helping them, even though they don't really have the deep logical skills needed to build, needed to write code from scratch. They're able to build something and get something in front of users, even if it's not perfect production grade. They can get an MVP out, and they can start building a user base, start building a fan base, and they can evolve into hiring software engineers if they really prove out the value, right? So it's unlocking the ability to create software for a much larger range of people, which is really exciting to me.
Yeah, something that I spend some time sometimes just thinking about is, and that example of the Java libraries. That's one of the reasons I actually shifted into data, because I was like, there's just far less to memorize in SQL. I'm not good at just pure recall. That's not what I was good at. So I actually went into the data side because I was like, okay, this is a notion that I'm interested in dealing with. And when we're looking at this evolution, and you mentioned they're now tools to help us put pictures or context to discussions. And sometimes I do think about the actual software development lifecycle, right? And everything that's gone into it is been designed because a technologist was required to really do heavy lifting. And you mentioned Lovable. I can get pretty far with Lovable. You put in the hands of a business user and say, hey, here's how you work with it. They can get pretty far with Lovable. And it starts making me wonder, how we viewed requirements, how we viewed this SDLC, how we viewed the role of an engineer. If that process, because we're democratizing tech development, if that's not going to undergo some, Scrum itself, it might be under threat at some point, but I do wonder if some of these handoff points and some of these traditional things that we've seen do start shifting along the way.
Yeah. I mean, we're starting to see this internally with our own teams. Like, even we have a designer who 2-3 years ago would have been sending us Figma files, right? And instead now he vibe codes with OpenHands and sends us like fully working prototypes. It's not necessarily in our production code base, and a front end engineer still needs to pick it up and run with it. But it's a fully working demo. Like, you get a much clearer picture of what the designer wants us to build. And that's super cool. And there are times too where you can just vibe code against the application itself if he just wants to change the color of a button, add some drop shadow, something like that. Like, that's really easy for him to just execute on it himself. We don't have to like do this waterfall process where he designs it and then an engineer has to pick it up and then QA has to look at it. And so it's much, you get these, especially for like small atomic changes, much more can happen with just a single person.
Yeah, and I think I had this question at one point, and I don't know if there's no answer yet, but I have been thinking about the product designer, the product manager, whether they're not going to be engineers, but whether they're going to have enough tools at their disposal to make that handoff, or even the requirements interface so much more, I guess, natural, just for an engineer to take over, that we might start seeing a shift in not only speed the features are released, but also a lot of times technology gets accused of a lot of failed projects because can't meet the requirements, or the requirements are one thing but they end up being another. I wonder if we're going to start seeing just more efficiency from what gets delivered, and how quickly things get delivered. The life cycle, actual shipping functional features more often.
Yeah, I mean, I would say on a case-by-case basis, we already see that. I think what's tricky is that because these, we don't have really clear processes around the new world yet, there's also a lot of noise created too. So like, if I look at my own engineering team, we're putting out code much faster, but there are bottlenecks around QA and code review. And so like my designer, for instance, can frequently open up a pull request that just works out of the box. It does the thing it says it's going to do. Every now and then, maybe he stretches a little bit too far and he starts touching application logic, or the AI starts touching application logic that wasn't fully spec'd out. And like, now that's creating some extra noise for the team. And so like figuring out where to draw those lines, like where can the designer self-service, where do they actually need to hand off to an engineer before it actually goes into a change to the code base. We still haven't figured out those processes yet. And so if you look at engineering teams, a lot of times they'll say they're seeing a moderate boost in productivity, but it's not as much as they expect. And I think it's because we haven't figured out where to draw those new lines yet. How do we pull the signal forward without also pulling the noise forward, right?
Absolutely. I guess as you're seeing this play out across the industry, and we talked about maintenance, and we talked about some other factors in there that are going to come up. You mentioned we're going to pull some of the noise forward as well. Are there things that, if someone is let's say various points in this journey, are there things that people need to be aware of when it comes to, okay, this tool does X, but for me to get to something that I want to consider shippable quality, something that I feel comfortable integrating into our product, what does that gap look like? What are things that people need to be aware of?
Yeah. I mean, I would say the main thing is, I would say early in the days of AI agents, there was a lot of noise about, we're going to replace software engineers. Software engineers are going to be out of a job. I think that has very much proven not to be the case. I think there are some questions about junior engineers and how they fit into the picture now that those simplest tasks can be really easily outsourced to AI. But for your senior engineer and above, there's still, you still need a human in the loop looking at, what are the changes being made here? Do they make sense with our current architecture? Are they the sorts of changes that are going to be, set us up for the future, rather than adding tech debt to the code base? I saw a good post earlier this week that said a good senior engineer invents abstractions that are easy to vibe code over. Right? I think that's a really good way of thinking about it. Right? You still need, really smart engineers figuring out how are we going to architect things to scale into the future. If you just have non-technical folks vibe coding, you're going to end up with a mess of a code base within a matter of weeks. You're going to find you need to just trash everything and start from scratch again.
I like that. And I guess as you're looking at just the role of the software, if you are, and again, I agree with you. I don't think software engineers are being replaced. I think the role is shifting. You kind of touched on this, but the skills that should be retained, the skills that maybe we should start focus on developing even a little bit more, just because maybe previously we didn't think about it, or we didn't have time. But what are those future forward skills that should be retained, and what are the skills that, hey, we should be optimizing for, because that's going to be where the role is heading?
Yeah, I mean, I like to say that the like durable competitive advantage that humans have over AI is empathy. So like that's empathy for the end user, right? Do I understand what the end user actually wants here and what they're trying to accomplish? If the AI just reads a ticket or reads feedback from the users, it's going to just guess at like what the end user experience should be. And I think it's really important that an engineer or a product manager or somebody is actually like bringing their knowledge, their empathy for the end user to bear on the situation. It's also empathy for like your future self or, other engineers that are going to work on this project, understanding like, am I introducing abstraction into the project that, other people are going to be able to grok and that other people are going to be able to work with going forward. So it's a lot of critical thinking about like, so it's a lot of theory of mind. How are other people going to think about this? How well is this feature going to be received as it's designed? How well is this going to work with future changes to the code base? So there's a lot of that just, thinking about thinking that I think humans still are much better at than large language models.
How quickly, I guess, if we look back over the last couple of years, it feels like things have moved really quickly. I don't think it's funny because I've been recording my podcast for 6 years, and I was actually going back and going, hey, what are some interesting from the Vault episodes I could bring back? And I listened through a couple of them. And I'm like, well, that I don't know if I can. I mean, things have started shifting, viewpoints have shifted, and it's interesting that within that time frame, things have gone this quickly. If we're looking forward, are we going to similarly see the acceleration continue at the rate it has? At some point, are we going to slow down? I mean, what are your thoughts on just the speed of things and how they're moving?
Yeah, I think we're still in the first innings of this change. You're still seeing large language models get better and better at a really fascinating clip. Every 6 months or so, there's a step change in what they're capable of, the like order of magnitude of tasks they're able to take on. So that's really exciting. But I think even if you were to freeze large language models today and say they're not going to get any better, we have not taken full advantage of what they're capable of. We haven't figured out the right interfaces for humans to interact with them. We haven't figured out the right organizational structures to like deal with just a massive amount of output that they can throw out. So there's just a ton of work for us to do in terms of like the psychology of these tools and in terms of the structure of our organizations to fully take advantage of what we have today. I think we're just in the first innings, and there's a lot of work to do.
Absolutely. Makes complete sense. Robert, I think this is going to be super interesting to maybe come back and visit in year, 18 months and see how things have shifted. I think if we would have had this conversation at the beginning of this process, I think to now, it would have been a quantum leap. I don't, as you mentioned, we'll have to see where and how quickly things move and adopt. But if somebody does want to reach out, if somebody does want to learn a little bit more, what are some good ways?
Yeah, so you can get in touch with us through our website at openhands.dev. I would also encourage folks to check out our GitHub project. It's github.com/openhands/openhands. There's a link there to our Slack. So we have a community Slack that's very active. Love having folks in there asking questions, giving us feedback, things like that. Most of our development occurs in there. So if you have feedback on the product, you want to participate, you want to open up a pull request, add some feature that you care about, we'd love to chat with you there. And just a very active community on GitHub as well. Feel free to open issues, open pull requests.
Awesome. Appreciate that. And thank you for your time. Thanks for coming on and sharing with us.
Yeah, this was really fun. I appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. All right. That's it for the episode. Be back again. Different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, If you're an engineer, Robert talked a little bit about what's happening to the agents that are helping us take over some of that coding, some of the aspects of engineering that we might not like. So if you did enjoy the episode, share this with somebody else, a colleague that might find it beneficial. And also, please like, subscribe, comment. Let me know how the show's going for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.